Are you constantly feeling unmotivated to practice your instrument? Are there certain things in your playing that you know you need to work on, you know you need to get better at certain pieces of music, but you just can't get yourself to get your instrument out and get working on it? Well, in this video, I'm going to be talking about some tips for not only getting you to practice more, but to get you to practice more consistently and efficiently. It all comes down to one simple idea, one simple hack that I'm going to kind of flesh out and give you more information on how to implement this into your practicing. If this is the first time we're meeting, my name is Dr. Natalie Law, and I'm a professional bassoonist and teacher, and I love to help students just like you learn how to play the bassoon and get better at your skills and feel confident playing this instrument. So if you're not already, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, comment any questions down below as you're watching the video. You can equate playing bassoon or any instrument to being like playing a sport. You know, it's really fun to be able to play at the games or the tournaments, or to be able to compete, to be able to win something. You know, it's really fun to have those moments. But just as we all know, for any sport, for you to be successful in any sport, it takes an immense amount of practice. And a lot of times those practices are not fun. You're doing maybe conditioning, or you're doing exercises that you don't really like to do, but they help your body perform better when it comes to that tournament or that match or that game, and then you're more prepared to do well. And ultimately, you enjoy yourself more when you're doing better at the thing that you want to do. You know, most people don't play sports because they're bad at them. They play sports because they're good at them and they enjoy it and they feel successful at it. And I think it's the exact same thing with playing an instrument. It's really fun to be able to play music that you want to play. It's really fun to be able to perform at a concert. It's really fun to be able to share with other people your skills on your instrument and be able to entertain people with your playing. But in order to be able to do all those things and to do them well and to feel successful at them, you have to practice. I think all of us struggle with practicing at some point. You know, some people really love practicing and seem to do really well at it. A lot of us, you know, at one point or another, it's a struggle for us. Maybe we've got a lot going on in our lives and it's hard to fit the time in or prioritize the time to practice. For a lot of us, it's, you know, it can seem like a chore because yes, you know that you have to practice your scales to be able to play this piece better, but it's no fun practicing your scales. It can be really difficult for a lot of people. I know I have struggled with practicing a lot. But I have picked up some tips and things over the years that have, you know, helped me practice, and not only practice more, like actually get more playtime on my instrument when I need to, but also to be a little bit more efficient. And so that I feel like when I am practicing, my time is really well spent and I'm focused on the important things and I'm achieving the things that need to be achieved. I know for a lot of people, if you may be watching this, you may be a professional bassoonist, but I would guess that you're not. Maybe you're a student or you play bassoon as a hobby, you know, on the side. It's something that you do, you know, as one part of your life, and you have lots of other things going on. So it can be really hard to fit in practice time when it's, you know, one of many things that you're doing. And I think it goes back to that sport analogy that, you know, if you want to enjoy the tournaments or you want to enjoy playing the game well, you have to spend the time practicing. And practicing can be really satisfying and really enjoyable. You know, I know it's fun to play your favorite things, but it can also be really satisfying to make progress in your practicing and achieve little milestones on your way to your goals, to be able to do those things in your practice. When I'm working with students and they are struggling with trying to practice, maybe they're trying to fit more practice into their schedule. If they're coming to lessons every week and they haven't really practiced that much since our last lesson, I try to talk about that sport analogy, because what sports have that we don't typically have as musicians is sports have practices, and they have practices that happen at a given time throughout the week, and they're scheduled for you. They're sort of an external thing that you kind of, if you want to be involved in that sport, you have to participate in those practices. And those practices are there, you know, if you're on a team sport, they're there to support the team and the team can practice. But a lot of times those practices are for individuals to develop their strength and other things that they need to be able to do their whatever sport it is well. And so a lot of sports have built-in schedules. On bassoon, especially, you may be taking lessons on bassoon. Maybe you're taking weekly or bi-weekly lessons on bassoon, and so you have kind of someone regularly checking in on you, which can be motivating, but it's really hard to find that time in between lessons or in between checkpoints with a teacher or whatever it may be to schedule up that practice. And so the biggest tip that I have found with practicing is to plan my practice, to plan it out in advance, just like I would if I were scheduling an appointment or scheduling a meeting or scheduling time to work on a specific project. I schedule my practice time. I'm the type of person where I like to have like a Google Calendar and use blocks of time to manage my day. 2 hours working on this thing from this time to this time. That really helps me be able to sort of plan my days. And I put in the things in my calendar that can't change. Maybe I have rehearsals or performances or meetings or appointments or things that are sort of set, and then I build in my time that I have around those things. So if you aren't already planning your practice, like the actual time that you're going to be spending practicing out in advance, then that's going to be your first kind of hurdle to overcome. I usually do it on a weekly basis. Like for me, it seems to work well that on Sundays, I usually plan my week and I plan, okay, I've got these things going on this week. I need to accomplish these tasks. And so, or I need to accomplish this thing in my practice. I have a rehearsal coming up for something, difficult orchestral piece that I'm going to need to spend some time practicing. Okay, that first rehearsal is, 2 weeks from Thursday. And so I'm going to need to spend at least a couple hours between now and then, on that piece. So I plan in advance. I'm going to spend an hour on it this week, and then I'll spend, an hour or two on this thing for the following week. I not only decide which hours of which days I'm going to be practicing, I'm going to be deciding what I'm going to be practicing during those times. And it may work for you if your schedule is really regular every week. If you, work and then you have the evenings free, or if you're a student and your schedule is pretty similar week to week in terms of your schedule, you might just decide, okay, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, those are my practice days. I'm going to spend an hour and a half on those days practicing, depending on what your situation is. So that might be easier for you rather than every single week having to time block and fit them in. So whatever works for you, but either way, you need to plan when you're going to practice. But once you do decide when you're going to practice, which hours, then you're going to decide what you need to accomplish during those times. So if you have a concert coming up, maybe with an ensemble, and there's a piece of music that's a little tricky and you need to work on it, then plan, okay, I'm going to work on this piece during this period of time. During that period of time, you might want to have a more specific goal where you are working on a specific passage or working something up to a certain tempo, or maybe you're just practicing an exercise that will help you do this particular passage better. So getting as specific as possible in terms of what you actually need to accomplish. So that's kind of an easy one when you have, an ensemble or you have a performance of some type coming up. That's an external deadline, an external motivator to get you to practice because you want to do well for that particular goal. That's where I would start. I would work backwards from performance and then figure out what do I need to have accomplished each week leading up to that, and then fill in the time blocks with the steps, each step needed to get to my eventual goal. That's how I would work up for a performance. Now, a lot of us we're doing performances, but there's a lot of other things that you should be practicing as well. And a lot of times I know if you play in a band of some sort, a lot of times the bassoon parts aren't always as exciting in bands or as difficult in bands as they are in orchestras, especially depending on the level that you're playing in. So if maybe you're playing in an ensemble but the music isn't very difficult, you want to be challenging yourself to play some other things as well, because you want to have other goals that motivate you to practice and improve your skills. So maybe if the ensemble playing isn't motivating you enough, maybe if it's too easy, you maybe want to plan something where you're playing in a solo setting, or where you're playing with a chamber group, and that could be just you're gonna perform for your family around the holidays, or maybe there's a group of your friends who want to get together and play in a chamber group, and that's usually a little bit more difficult music than larger ensemble, and you are going to go play at the mall or something, or you're going to go out in public and play for people. So having those sorts of things to work towards might motivate you to practice more in your practice sessions if you feel like larger ensemble music isn't really getting you motivated enough to practice. But even so, even if you don't have an external motivator or a deadline to work something up to, there's other things you should be practicing. So you should be incorporating some type of method book, etude book, exercises outside of any sort of ensemble or solo playing that you're doing, because that's going to really elevate your playing without having to have all the external motivation. So you want to make your own sort of goals. If you're not working with a teacher on these etude books, if you were working with someone like me in private lessons, and of course if you're interested in that, I'll link down below where you can get private lessons with me. But if you're working with any private teacher, they may be giving you material to work on week after week, and they may be directing you to specific exercises, and so you want to practice those. But even if you're not working with a teacher, try to get yourself to practice different exercises and spend time every week, every time you're practicing in those exercises. Sometimes you may only be spending like 10 minutes on a particular etude book or a particular etude, and other times you may be spending an hour on it. Kind of depends on what you're doing and what you're trying to get out of it. But you should set goals that, I want to have this etude completely learned by this date. So it's going to take me this much time, I think, to learn it. So I then need to spend this much time per week. So I'm going to schedule in, okay, on this practice session and this practice session, I'm going to be working on my etude. And I'm specifically in each practice session, I'm going to be working on, maybe I'm going to work on this passage in one practice session and another passage in a different practice session. So you can get really specific. I mean, literally, if you're someone like me who likes to use like Google Calendar, or even just a handwritten planner or calendar, you can literally write, what pieces you plan to play or what measures you plan to practice. I really encourage you to get specific about what you're going to practice in advance. And then when you sit down to practice, you've already mapped out what you're going to work on. You've reduced a little bit of the initial friction of getting started by taking away some of that decision fatigue that we get, when we have so much we could be practicing or so much we could be working on, but we don't know where to start. You've already decided that in advance, and you just start doing it. So if you plan the time and you plan exactly what you're supposed to do, you're going to be more likely to actually practice and practice efficiently. So let's talk about what a practice session should actually look like, because practicing is one of those things that we all have to do and we talk about sometimes, and your teacher may say, do this, do this, do this in your practice session, but it's something that we do in isolation, and so sometimes it's hard to know, am I working on the right things? How do I know what to work on and for how long? And how do I know to be more efficient? How do I track my progress? Is this really worth my time? It can be really frustrating to come up with a practice routine. And so I think it's helpful to kind of know one way of approaching your practice sessions. And so all of your practice sessions should start with a warm-up routine. And this is really only true if it's the first practice session of the day. You may have a day where you practice 2 or 3 separate times and have breaks in between. You really only need to warm up during your first practice session because usually you stay warmed up throughout the day usually. If you haven't already, I would recommend watching my warm-up routine video, because in that video I talk about my warm-up routine, how I warm up, my process for that, and how you can create your own warm-up routine. And I really believe in my warm-up routine because I have seen in my own playing that when I'm incorporating a really well thought out warm-up routine into my regular playing, that my playing really improves exponentially. It's really when I'm doing sort of the mini technical session and working on sort of foundational, fundamental exercises in my warm-up routine, it really makes a difference across all of my playing. You know, there's not a whole lot of things where when you work on one specific thing, if it helps everything in your playing, but having a good warm-up routine can be that thing that helps everything. You know, so if there was one thing to work on, you know, having this warm-up routine is what you could work on in a warm-up, in a practice session. And so having a good warm-up routine, it could be 10 minutes long, it could be an hour long. You know, warm-up routines can vary. Different people have kind of different approaches to it. If you play a different instrument other than bassoon, you might have, you know, special things that you do for your instrument. But on bassoon, I find that I like to do scale exercises, long tone exercises, and tonguing exercises. And in all of those exercises, I'm working on different articulations and I'm working on different dynamics. And I'm working on all registers of the bassoon. And the way that I cycle through my warm-up routine is I have a key of the day. So all of my exercises, I've picked a key of the day in advance and I'm just playing them in that key. Then the next day I have a different key of the day. And I happen to go around the circle of fifths just to keep myself honest and make sure that I'm practicing the scales that are a little bit more cumbersome to practice. And that takes away some of that decision fatigue by just designating this is the key of the day. I'm going to do all my exercises in this key, and that takes care of that. So your practice session should start with a warm-up routine of some sort. Then usually you might want to move into an etude or an exercise book or method book, kind of depending on what level you're at or what you're working on. You should have some sort of book that you're working out of. For a lot of beginning intermediate students, the Weissenborn method for bassoon is a really good book to work out of. A lot of bassoon teachers teach out of that book, and it has just a lot of great exercises to really practice specific issues on the bassoon. There are some other books out there as well. You might be kind of working from several at any given time, so it's worth kind of testing things out to figure out, you know, what book seems to be challenging you but is also achievable. But you should be working on some type of etude, some type of exercises. And again, that can be a variable amount of time. You might spend 15 minutes on it because you have a shorter practice session. Or if you're planning a longer practice session, you might plan like an hour on your etude book. Especially if you're more of an advanced player, that's something you really want to be focused in on. And then, you know, the kind of final or third element of a practice session is usually any ensemble music or solo music or, you know, repertoire that you're working on that you can work on in that practice session. That should be part of your practice session as well, so that you're coming to rehearsals prepared and you're meeting the goals of what you need to do. And so that's kind of an overview of what a practice session should look like. And really that kind of overview, I would recommend that for just about any level of player, whether you're more of a beginner player or more of an advanced player. That's kind of, you know, those are 3 kind of main things to work on in your practicing. And sometimes you may not be in an ensemble or you may not have any real, you know, solo opportunities coming up. And the only thing you're going to be working on is your warm up and your etudes. And that's plenty. I mean, that's really good practicing right there. You don't necessarily need, you know, performance rep to be practicing to really get the most out of your playing. So that's kind of how I would structure practice sessions, and how long you spend on each is totally dependent on your level, your playing, stamina. If you're more of a beginner, you may only be able to play for 10 or 15 minutes at a time, and you really can't spend that much time on things because you just can't make it through. If you're an advanced player, you might spend 30 minutes on each of those things. It really kind of depends, and you can kind of experiment with different lengths of time to figure out what works for you. I find it helpful to sometimes use what's called the Pomodoro technique, which is where typically it's where you set a timer for 25 minutes, and then you set the timer when it and you work for those 25 minutes, and then you set the timer for 5 minutes when that's up, and you take a break, go do a brief walk or go get a drink or something in a 5-minute break, and then you come back and do another 25-minute focus session. I have found that sort of Pomodoro technique to be helpful as well for practicing, and I recommend it for my students. When you feel like you're not getting done what you want to get done, that you set a timer for a specific amount of time. It doesn't have to be 25 minutes. It could be 10 minutes. It could be 50 minutes. But you want to set a timer for that specific amount of time, and you know that for that set amount of time you're going to be working on that thing, and then you're going to take a break when that's done. And that really helps your brain focus on that specific thing, and then you know that there's a break coming, and so you can relax for a minute before you move on to the next thing. I find this particularly helpful when I'm working on something that I really don't want to work on. If it's just something that I hate doing, but I know that I have to do it, I use the timer and I decide I'm spending 20 minutes on this, and that's it. And I know that it's not going to be perfect after 20 minutes, but I know that I'm at least forcing myself to spend the time on the things that I don't want to spend the time on. So that can be a way to practice things that you know you have to practice, but you just don't want to. And that's a way to kind of wrap your mind around it. Now that we've talked about what should be in your practice session and how to plan for the actual time that your practice is going to occur, I want to talk about one other element that's related to planning your practicing, but also to measuring and tracking your progress, which I think is a huge component to really making progress on the bassoon. And that is using a practice log. Now, I have linked my practice log down in the video description, and you can have it for free PDF download. And in that practice log, there is a section on it where you can plan for the week what you are going to work on, including things like your warm-ups and your etudes. So I know for me, I have the key of the day with my warm-ups, and I know that every single warm-up session I'm going to be doing the new key of the day. So I don't necessarily need to plan what keys I'm going to be playing in advance because I have this system in place, but I might change the tempos of things. Last week I was doing my double tonguing exercise at this tempo. The following week I might want to do my double tonguing exercise at this tempo, and that's my goal for the week. And so even for things as simple as your warm-ups, having little mini goals or things that you're going to be changing or improving each week can be what you can plan for. And then of course things like your ensemble music or solo repertoire, or if you're preparing for an orchestral audition and you have excerpts to work on, which things that you're going to be working on, you can list them in that sort of upper planning portion that tells you what you're going to be practicing. And you can also put things like tempos or measure numbers of what you're going to practice, so you have more specific goals or specific things that you're going to practice. And then in the section below, I have where you actually track, where you actually log your practice. And this idea comes out of a lot of sports too. I know a lot of runners will track their miles that they ran, and what time of day it was at, and what the weather was like, and how they feel. There are a lot of athletes who track their progress in sort of a similar way, and it goes for almost anything, whether you're trying to track what you're eating or you're trying to create a budget or something like that. When you're tracking what you're doing, actually writing down or notating somehow what you're actually doing in your practice session, it kind of makes you look back and think, oh, I did this. I spent, 2 hours, on this thing when really I should have been maybe working on this thing. Just writing down what you're working on throughout the week can be really illuminating. And so for me, my practice log, the way that I set it up is I write in, what was the material that I worked on, how much time I spent on it, and any notes about that material. Maybe I write the tempo that I got it to that day, or I write, need to work on this next, or, this is performance ready, let's move on to this. I write little notes to myself to remind myself, and then that also decreases decision fatigue the next time I come to practice, because I just look back at my practice log and say, oh, last time I worked on this, so the next logical step is going to be to work on this section. Because we think we know what we're doing, but when it's actually on paper, it really makes a difference. And one other element, if you're regularly tracking, if you're regularly writing down what you're practicing, it creates an attitude where you know that you have to write down what you did in your practice session and how much time you spent on things and what you worked on and what you achieved. So it's sort of a thing where it makes you want to be able to write down things in your practice log. I know that in times where I've used my practice log regularly and I'm getting good practice in, I am really motivated by, I want to write, that I accomplished this in my practice log. I know that I'm going to have to write this in my practice log. I don't want to write in my practice log that I wasted my time or that I didn't get done what I wanted to get done. So it's it can be a little bit of a motivator to be like, I know I have to write this down. It's going to go on paper. It's kind of like checking in with somebody, but you're holding yourself accountable. Even if it's just for a couple months that you use it and then you don't force yourself to use it after that, it can be really illuminating in changing certain habits in your practicing, because you see what you're working on and what you're not. And you can start to make correlations between, okay, I spent an hour on this thing, and did that, that actually got better when I spent time on it. So you really start to see, wow, when I spend time practicing, it gets better. So you don't have to use a practice log forever. I know it can be a little bit tedious to use one. You can use it digitally. You can use, if you have mine and you just put it on an iPad or your phone and you just write directly on it or type directly into it, you can do that. Or you can make your own practice log that fits your needs. This is just one that I made. I liked that there was a planning section to it that I could do, at the beginning of every week, and I liked that there was the actual log section of it, and I tracked the things that were important to me. So the secret to practicing more is planning. So when you're planning what exactly you're practicing and you have a structure of your practice sessions and you're planning when you're going to practice and what you're going to work on during each of those practice sessions, and you're tracking your practice with the practice log or in some way, you will practice more and you're going to practice more consistently, efficiently. And if you keep this up, you will make so much improvement in your playing. It's amazing what just time spent on the instrument, that's thoughtful, good practice, what it can do for your playing. I mean, you can see exponential results in your playing in just a few weeks and just a few months. It doesn't take long of regular, consistent, thoughtful practice that is well planned out like this to see really good results. It's just getting yourself to do it. But I think as much as possible, if you can remove the decision fatigue, for me, it's doing the key of the day for the warm-ups. It's planning my week in advance what I'm going to work on so that when I go to do it, I don't have to think about what I'm doing. I just do it, and removing friction as much as possible. When in your planning will help you practice more. So if this video was helpful for you, if it gave you some ideas for practicing, please give me a thumbs up and make sure you're subscribed to the channel, and let me know down in the comments, what things do you find helpful to help you practice more? certainly I didn't cover everything that you can do to help you practice better in this video. There's certainly other tips and things that work better for different people. So let us know, and let's help each other out and give each other some ideas, because we all struggle with running into practice ruts and struggling to practice enough. So let's help each other out. Let me know your ideas about practicing down below.